felt like the space wasn't merely watching you, but scrutinizing your every detail? No one says a word, yet you know you're being measured with each step, each expression, even the silences you create. You've done nothing wrong, you're simply present, and somehow that alone is enough for others to begin judging. We live in a society where everything is instantly evaluated. Your posture, your reflexes, your gaze, even your silence isn't exempt from analysis. A single furrowed brow carries meaning. A single explanation can be misinterpreted. And one moment of vulnerability in public can sometimes undo years of building an image. You don't need to speak to make a mistake. In fact, sometimes speaking is the mistake. But not everyone learns how to control themselves in a space they cannot control. In today's video, we'll uncover 9 seemingly harmless behaviors that quietly leak your inner strength in public. And then, I'll show you 6 layers of silent armor Stoic strategies that make you formidable without saying a word. Not through force, but through a calm so grounded, others are compelled to adjust their tone in your presence. Part 1. 9 things you should never do in public. 1. Never reveal your insecurity. Because when they see the crack, they'll try to widen it. There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and without saying a word, every eye turns toward them. Not because they're tall, not because they're attractive, not because they're powerful, but because something in them emits a frequency that makes others recalibrate themselves. They're not trying to impress, they're not trying to perform, they simply exist and let that presence speak for them. That isn't luck. It's the result of an inner world built sturdy enough not to be shaken by the weight of anyone's gaze. It's stability inside uncertainty. It's strength without introduction. The opposite is the person who's always rushing to prove themselves. They list their achievements, recount their struggles, try hard to appear fine, capable, different. But what they don't realize is this. The moment you try to look composed is the moment you confirm to the world that you are not. And without anyone doing anything, that insecurity alone begins to erode the value you carry. In Stoic thought, few things are more dangerous than letting others feel that you need reassurance. Because the one who needs to be reassured is the one who hasn't mastered their own mind. And if you don't command your mind, you command nothing at all. Modern life is a grand stage where everyone is both actor and audience, both performer and critic. On this stage, the one who leaks insecurity is like a poorly rehearsed role-breaking script. People don't just see your flaws, they will write the next scene around them, casting you as the weaker part. They will speak to you as if you need guidance. They will listen with pity, not respect. And from that moment on, their definition of you shifts not because you're not good enough, but because you unknowingly taught them to question your certainty. I once witnessed a man walk into an interview room in Chicago. His resume was flawless, seasoned, skilled, solid demeanor. But just a few sentences in, he began expressing doubts about his cultural fit, admitted he was trying to rebuild confidence after being laid off. He had no idea that every word wasn't just delivering information, it was surrendering the right to define himself to the person across the table. And the interviewer wasn't cruel, they were simply looking for someone stable enough to carry weight. A ship that sends out weak signals isn't chosen for a long voyage. That's not unfair. It's reality. Stoics never taught us to hide emotion, but they emphasized this. Not everyone deserves to see the most fragile parts of you. You can have a bad day. You can feel unsure. You can wrestle with self-doubt. Strength doesn't mean you lack those emotions. It means you hold them within. Contain them, dialogue with them, and do not let them dictate how you show up in the world. There is a kind of aura that doesn't come from appearance or speech, but from calm in the face of judgment. When you walk into a meeting, a party, a foreign space, what people notice first isn't your clothes, it's whether or not you need their approval. And the more you need them to think you're okay, the more you want them to see your worth. The more you crave their perception of your confidence, the more they feel the emptiness behind your smile, the tremble behind your polished words, the crack beneath your perfect suit. Insecurity isn't a sin, but displaying it is a slow erosion of others' belief in you. It doesn't always show in words. Sometimes it's how quickly you repeat old achievements. Sometimes it's your need to over-justify a simple point. Sometimes it's just your inability to stay silent when no one asked. Confidence isn't about having it all. It's about not needing to explain it all. They let silence become a lure. They let purposeful ambiguity serve as a mist to shield their value. They know what's easily seen is easily judged. What's hard to read is hard to attack. I once had a boss who rarely spoke. In critical meetings, he just listened. When others offered opinions, he never argued, just asked one question. What effect do you think this will have that others haven't considered? And then silence. That silence made everyone reflect. And when he finally spoke, every word stitched together the loose threads in the room. No one asked about his resume. No one cared about his degree. He didn't say it because he didn't need to, and that's why people trusted him, because true presence is never built with words. In a world where everyone tries to appear grounded, the one who doesn't need to prove anything becomes the most formidable. That's why Stoicism has survived millennia. Because it doesn't teach you how to be liked. It teaches you how not to be underestimated by refusing to invite judgment. Don't say who you are. Let the way you walk, the way you sit, the way you stay silent be your loudest introduction. Next time you feel insecure, don't rush to cover it up. Don't compensate with words. Don't decorate with reasons. Step back. Breathe. Hold the silence. Let it run through you. Let yourself grow familiar with it. Then let it know you've outgrown it. Because the moment you keep insecurity to yourself is the moment others begin to ask, what is this person thinking? And when they start wondering about you, you no longer need to say a word. 2. Don't boast about future plans, because dreams once spoken are easier to trample. There's a strange paradox in today's world. People praise boldness, push you to speak your dreams aloud, encourage you to broadcast your vision as if the universe will conspire to help you achieve it. But the cold truth is, the more people know about your plans, the more fragile they become. Because the moment you speak them, they're no longer yours. They become exposed to judgment, analysis, discussion, doubt. And you, without realizing it, have placed an unfinished structure into the storm. I once knew a young man full of energy and ambition. He had a bold startup idea, something that could disrupt an entire industry. But his first move wasn't building, it was announcing. At every gathering, he would endlessly talk about his vision, the next step, the expansion strategy. He thought speaking it would build momentum, but what he didn't realize was that every time he spoke, he was trading execution energy for the temporary high of external validation. The listeners didn't necessarily support him, but they would watch. And things not yet formed when exposed to light too soon become distorted. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The fruit of this life is good character and acts for the common good." Nowhere does it say you must declare intent before acting. Because in the world of Stoics, action is the only declaration that carries weight. Everything else is just an echo in the wind. People are quick to judge. When you share your future plans, they don't listen to understand, they listen to compare against their own metrics. And in that comparison, what you call a dream may be labeled delusion. What you call a detailed plan may be seen as naivete. Not because they're bad people, but because the mind instinctively doubts what it cannot yet see. And for that reason, the more you talk, the more pressure you bear from responses beyond your control. An unripe plan spoils faster when dissected too soon. Stoicism doesn't tell you to hide in fear. It teaches you that light belongs on results, not intentions. The wise don't say how far they'll go. They walk, and let others be surprised at how far they've already gone. A man in finance once told me how he spent 3 years developing a data system for emerging markets. No one knew, not even his wife. When it was complete, he made one call, presented the model, the data. The partner didn't ask, "Why haven't I heard of this?" He simply said, "Your silence is why I trust you." That's presence without promotion. Value born from strategic silence. The issue with announcing plans isn't about right or wrong. It's about leakage. Every time you talk instead of act, you replace progress with performance. You feel like you've done something while still standing still. It's a form of addiction. The rush of admiration for what you will do replaces the loneliness of quietly doing it. And that addiction over time erodes the need to act, because the praise came too early. The results are still too far. The Stoic understands that what matters most isn't the vision, it's the invisible grind. They know the loud dreamer may get applause, but the quiet one who works until it's real earns respect. The difference isn't in the volume, it's in the weight. A man can stand before a crowd and say he's writing a great book, and they'll clap. But if that same man writes nothing for 2 years, those claps become laughter. Meanwhile, another man rises early, writes silently, and one day places the book on the table and lets the world respond. He needs no promotion, he has proof. And here's the harsh but undeniable truth. People want you to succeed, but not before they do. When you share your plans, they'll listen, but behind the curious eyes may lie silent resentment. No one likes to feel left behind. And if you're not solid, if you still need approval to keep going, those glances can shake you. The truly strong don't need agreement. They need space. And silence protects that space. One day, you'll have a plan so thrilling it makes you tremble. It's so beautiful you want to scream it. You want to tell someone. You want to say, "I'm about to do something great." But hold it in. Swallow that urge. Let that excitement become action, not speech. Let the loneliness of the path become fuel for your focus. And remember, the quiet ones usually go further than the loud. Because in this world, what earns respect isn't the dream you speak, but the persistence you show when no one even knows what you're building. 3. Never complain in public. Silence is armor, while complaints are blades turned inward. People don't collapse from a single blow from the world. They collapse from tiny cracks in the mind, cracks they created themselves when they spoke too soon, without clarity. In those fractures, complaints are the first leaks. They drip little by little until resilience collapses without warning. You might not notice, but complaints aren't just a sign of weakness. They are an unconscious declaration that you've lost command of your mind. Every time you say life is so unfair, or I can't take it anymore, or this world is too cruel, you're surrendering the right to define your experience to whoever's listening. You offer your pain as excess baggage in exchange for a nod, a look of sympathy, or worse, a counterfeit kind of pity. In today's world, where everyone expresses everything, where emotion is worshipped above all, those who remain silent in suffering become strange creatures. And because they're rare, they are respected. Ordinary people groan when no one asks. Strong people clench their teeth even when the whole world stares. Not because they feel nothing, but because they understand. Emotions are assets and shouldn't be scattered among people unequipped to hold them. Have you ever seen someone complain at a cafe, in a meeting, or out in public? Phrases like, "I've tried everything but no one gets it," or "I'm so tired of being treated like this," or "Maybe I'm just not good enough," sound like cries for help. But what they receive isn't rescue, it's classification. People don't have to be cruel to judge you. They just need to see that you're weak, and that's enough to place you in the unreliable under pressure category. Complaining is unfiltered emotional leakage. It comes from an ego that hasn't been trained. It's the survival reflex of someone who hasn't learned to internalize pain. People think that by sharing sorrow, they're releasing it. But the truth is, they're exposing a piece of their inner map, the most vulnerable part. And if someone sharp enough sees it, they will use that map. Not out of malice, but because humans naturally react to weakness. A friend of mine once worked as an advisor for a large investment fund. Over dinner with a group of startup founders, a young man shared his struggles. He spoke about being betrayed by co-founders, rejected by investors, nights filled with anxiety and heartbreak. My friend said nothing. After dinner, I asked, "What do you think of him?" He just shook his head and said, "I don't invest in people who need to be heard. I invest in people who stay silent when everything's falling apart." That statement hit like a wake-up slap. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. In this world, people don't trust you for your tragic story. They trust you when you can remain composed in silence. Real endurance isn't about how well you groan. It's about how much pain you can carry without letting it spill. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Don't lament misfortune, turn it into fuel. Every complaint is fuel burned in the wrong direction. It should have burned inside you to straighten your spine, anchor your steps, deepen your gaze. But instead, you let it burn outside in other people's eyes, where it weakens your image and means nothing to your own growth." There are people who walk through suffering like walking down a dark hallway. No complaining, no pausing, no asking anyone to turn on the light. They just walk. Because they understand, the light must come from within. These people, when they walk into a room, don't have to say anything. You can feel it. This person has been through hell and still stands. And just like that, they make a stronger impression than any story ever could. In contrast, those who constantly complain in public emit a signal of weakness. Every time they open their mouth, they confirm to the world that they can't handle themselves. Worse still, once you're used to venting out loud, you lose the ability to endure silently. Your mind develops a shortcut. Pain equals speech. But the more you speak, the weaker you become. And the weaker you are, the more you speak desperate for empathy. That cycle turns you into someone who can no longer stand alone. The Stoic knows silence is not suppression, it is transformation. They don't muzzle themselves with pain. They turn pain into the stonework beneath their discipline. When you choose not to complain, you're not denying emotion. You're deciding, I will not let my emotions become someone else's property. I once met an elderly woman in a cancer hospital. She'd undergone 3 rounds of chemo, lost her hair, and was exhausted in both body and spirit. But during our conversation, she never once mentioned pain. She only spoke of things she still wanted to do. Not one complaint, not one blame. When I asked, "Aren't you angry?" She just looked at me and said, "Anger doesn't fix anything. I'm saving it for the road ahead." That answer left me silent for a long time, because that was stoicism without a label, no philosophy, no books. Just a woman who chose to hold her dignity instead of trading it for pity. Next time your throat tightens from rage, when you want to cry out, "I can't take it anymore," pause. Look at the person across from you. Ask yourself, does this person deserve to see the most fragile part of me? If the answer is no, then you know exactly what to do. Because in a chaotic world, you can't always control the situation, but you can always control how much of yourself others are allowed to see. And that sometimes is the greatest freedom you'll ever have. 4. Never publicly display emotional collapse. People don't need to see you fall. They only need to know you're still standing. There are moments when your mind fractures. Not because of some massive tragedy, but because of 1,000 tiny cuts from things that seem harmless. A careless glance, a cold comment, a rejection with no reason, or just the silence of someone who once mattered. You don't scream. You don't cry, you don't break down. But inside, something is quietly shattering. You feel yourself weakening, your pride thinning, your stability cracking under the silent ground beneath your feet. And then, you want to speak. You want someone to know you're not okay. You want someone's eyes to touch your pain and say, "I get it." But what you don't realize is you're in public. And anything you let show now is no longer within your control. You might think you're just being real or honest about your feelings. But the world doesn't operate on your feelings. It operates on how others perceive you, and in their perception, a twitch in your face, a break in your voice, a reddening in your eyes become clues revealing what you meant to hide. Emotional collapse isn't wrong. But letting it happen in front of others is a strategic decision. You can break, but not while being watched, not in a meeting, not at a party, not in a hallway full of strangers, not when you still have the option to hold yourself together. I once met a woman at a leadership conference. She was the CEO of a major non-profit handling domestic violence cases. For 30 years, she faced countless victims, abusers, and stories so dark they could break anyone in seconds. I asked her, "How do you not break down?" She just smiled and said, "I break, but not in front of them. They don't need to see me weak. They need to see me stand." That answer stayed with me for years. Because in a world this chaotic, there are people who need us to be steady, not because we can't be weak, but because if we break at that moment, there's no one left to hold the weight. The Stoics understood that emotions are rivers. You don't block them, but you choose where they flow. You don't let anger erupt in the middle of a debate. You don't wear sadness on your face while facing an opponent. You don't let internal collapse distort how others perceive your capacity to lead, manage, or simply remain composed on an ordinary day. You can cry, but cry when the door is shut. You can gasp in pain, but let it happen in a room where only the dark knows, because if you're not alert enough to conceal the breaking, you're inviting others to reprice your worth. And sadly, that price rarely includes compassion. It includes judgment. On the battlefield, a soldier doesn't die from the final blow, but from revealing the wound. Each time you let emotional collapse spill out unchecked, you do the same. You unsheath your sword just to show how brittle you are. And in others' eyes, that doesn't make you real. It makes you vulnerable. I once watched a leader face brutal attacks in a press conference, insulting questions, implied failures, personal digs. Everyone thought he'd snap, get angry, tremble, walk out. But he just listened, nodded, responded with short, calm answers that chilled the room. Afterward, he sat alone in his car for an hour. His assistant said that's when he allowed himself to break. But he didn't break in front of cameras, not in front of the crowd, not in front of those waiting to watch. And for that, no one dared to pat him with pity. They only respected the control because they never saw the fracture. Silence in pain is not numbness, it's command. When you learn to stay composed amid chaos, to hold your breath when insulted, to steady your gaze when betrayed, to stay quiet when misunderstood, you're no longer easy to manipulate. You become someone emotion can't dominate, and that makes you dangerous. In the Stoic world, achievement isn't how much you feel, it's how you manage what you feel without damaging how you appear. A man can hurt, he can be disappointed, he can be breaking inside. But if he walks into a room and no one feels it, he has already won a battle no one else saw. The battle between himself and his instinct to react. No one escapes days where they want to fall. But you can choose not to fall while others are watching. Because the world doesn't need to see your despair. It needs to see your stillness. And from that stillness you control the game. Next time collapse feels near pause, remember, this is not the place to break. Let the pain follow you home. Let it tap you at 2 a.m. Let it pull you from bed when no one's looking. But when you walk out the door, put on your coat, enter that meeting, or even pass someone's glance, let them see a version already composed. Not because you're pretending, but because you're practicing fortitude. People don't need to see you fall, they just need to know you're still standing. And that alone, sometimes, is enough to make them reconsider their own posture. 5. Don't engage in petty conflicts. The less you react, the harder you are to control. There are battles not worth winning because the moment you engage, you've already lost. And there are words that don't deserve a reply because just by responding, you shrink yourself. A mature person isn't measured by how often they win arguments, but by how often they choose to walk away from clashes that aren't worth their energy. Don't mistake silence for submission. Sometimes it's a declaration. I'm too vast to be dragged down by the trivial. Modern society turns us into creatures of constant reaction. A single snide comment, a sarcastic remark, a hostile glance, a differing opinion, each can spark a fire. And when the fire starts, our first instinct is retaliation. We talk back, we defend, we argue. We throw logic like weapons to prove we're right. But what we don't see is this. By stepping into petty conflict, we're placing ourselves on the same frequency as someone we don't even respect. Once in Los Angeles, I witnessed 2 men at a restaurant get into a dispute over the line. The first man said something harsh. The second, well-dressed, clearly successful, turned and fired back. Within minutes, the argument escalated into a physical altercation, and both were escorted out by security. That second man later sat on the curb, holding his head, saying he was on his way to the most important presentation of his year. He didn't deserve to lose that opportunity, but he did deserve the consequence because he forgot that walking away from a meaningless conflict isn't weakness, it's what you do when the road ahead still matters. The Stoics believe that tranquility is the most valuable asset one can maintain in a chaotic world. And each time we let someone's meaningless words ignite us, we cheapen that asset for the price of a fleeting sense of victory. But what is victory if you sacrifice composure? What is victory if you abandon self-command? What's the point of winning if you have to step down from your high ground and crawl into the mud where your opponent wanted you all along? Marcus Aurelius once reminded us, you always own the option of having no opinion. That doesn't mean you lack conviction. It means you have the right not to respond. The right to preserve stillness, the right not to let anything shake your center. In a world where everyone fights to have the last word, the one who says nothing becomes the one who forces everyone else to pause. Petty conflicts are like ripples across a lake. If you watch calmly, they fade. But if you react, tossing stones, stirring the water, you're the one muddying the surface. And once the water is murky, no one sees your depth anymore. A mind that reacts to every disturbance is a mind not yet under control. And one who hasn't mastered himself cannot lead anything else. I once knew a tech executive who over 5 years never once raised his voice in a meeting. He faced insults. He was challenged. He led through crises, but he never responded with rage. Once I asked, "Why didn't you defend yourself when they lied about you?" He simply smiled and said, "I don't argue with people who have nothing to lose. I have too much to protect." That answer cut like a blade, sharp enough to silence every reactive impulse I had after that. Strength isn't in clapping back. It's in being strong enough not to. A person who knows who they are doesn't feel threatened by someone who doesn't even know what they're saying. Those who provoke, mock, and poke are simply looking for someone to pull into their low-energy orbit. And if you respond, you confirm, "I'm on your level." When really you should have walked away to prove that silence itself can be power. Some will say, "So I should let people say false things about me?" And I'll say, "Who matters enough that you must correct them?" The one who truly knows you needs no explanation. The one who doesn't won't understand it anyway. And the one who misinterprets you on purpose will only weaponize your words. In every scenario, silence remains the most strategic move. A major war requires thinking. A petty one only needs impulse. And when you let impulse lead, you're no longer self-possessed. You become an extension of your environment. You're being remotely controlled. That's exactly what Stoicism seeks to dismantle. No one can shake you without your permission. No words can provoke you unless you choose to lose calm. No conflict can pull you in unless you decide to belong to that game. Next time someone attacks you verbally, don't react. Observe. Not to retaliate, but to understand. What energy are they bringing to you? If it's low, don't accept it. If it's bait, don't bite. If it's provocation, don't offer your face. Let them waste their fire in empty space. Let them realize your presence isn't manipulated by cheap tactics. And in the end, they'll be left to face the silence they've created. Those who don't react to small fights aren't passive. They've simply defined which wars are worth it. And what's more powerful than a temperamental man is someone who holds his fury for moments that matter. Their silence isn't surrender, it's a choice. And that choice is the mark of wisdom. Choose your words wisely. Choose your battles deliberately. Choose the stage where you're willing to step in. As for the rest, let it pass, like wind brushing against stone. The stone doesn't react to exist. It simply remains and the wind disappears on its own. 6. Don't crave attention. Silence has a frequency, and only the steady can emit it. Deep inside every human being lies a primal fear, being forgotten. We fear walking into a room and being unseen. We fear speaking and being met with silence. We fear doing something great that no one acknowledges. And so, to fight that fear, we learn to send signals. We try to be interesting. We strain to stand out. We push into conversations. We crave for someone's eyes to pause on us, even for just a second. But the irony is, the more we try to be seen, the more we lose ourselves in an ego desperate for validation. Those who crave attention aren't bad people, but they are people who haven't yet seen themselves from the inside. Because if you've ever sat with yourself in real silence, without mirrors, without screens, without applause, if you've ever asked, if no one sees me, do I still have value? And answered honestly, then you no longer need to send signals. You sit there, present, silent, not needing to be noticed, understood, or affirmed. And strangely, that's when people start noticing you. In a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, silence becomes a strange kind of sound. Others don't hear you, but they sense you. They feel the grounded gaze that asks for nothing. They feel the shoulders that aren't trying to prove anything. They see someone who's not trying to be liked, and because of that, they become unforgettable. The less you need to be seen, the more gravitational you become. The less you talk, the more people listen. I once watched a young man, brilliant, eager, force his way into every conversation. He was always the first to speak, always telling his story even when no one asked. In his eyes was the hunger of a child waiting to be praised. But with each attempt, people pulled away. No one hated him, but no one wanted him around either. Because there's a kind of fatigue that comes from watching someone who cannot stand their own silence. And like some cosmic law, he became forgotten precisely because he tried too hard not to be. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." It's absurd we claim to love ourselves, yet live through the eyes of others. And that exchange inner freedom for outer nods is costly. Because those eyes won't feed you on lonely nights. Those compliments won't lift you when you've fallen. Only the part of you that doesn't need to be seen is strong enough to stay when no one's watching. The one who doesn't crave attention is someone who's already been ignored and survived, who's been overlooked and remained intact, who knows that true presence isn't in volume but in weight. Not in how many see you, but in whether you can still see yourself when no one else does. There's a kind of magnetism that doesn't make noise, doesn't shine, doesn't call out, but the closer people get, the harder it is to look away. It's not attraction from looks, it's gravity. And gravity only comes from those who are deep, still, and full from within. They don't chase glances, they don't try to impress. They need no approval, and that's why they can't be ignored. Those with gravity don't walk into a room trying to impress. They walk in fully present, not performing. Every gesture carries intention. Every gaze holds substance. Every silence has depth. And others, without realizing, adjust their tone, posture, and rhythm in their presence. No one tells them to, but everyone does. Because instinct recognizes this person didn't come to be seen. They came to show they don't need to be. There's a strange rule in this society. The more someone wants attention, the more they must chase it. But those with gravity do nothing, and that's why others stop to watch. Like the moon, which doesn't shine on its own but still commands attention through reflection. The silent are the same. They don't generate light, but reflect whatever light already exists. And in doing nothing, they show others more clearly who they themselves are. In a crowded room, there's loud laughter, fast talk, darting glances, a storm of signals begging to be seen. But then there's someone who simply sits there. No signals, no words, no need to insert themselves. And yet, everyone feels their presence. And when they speak even slowly, the room stills. Not because of authority, but because their voice comes from a rare stillness. No one can explain it, but everyone feels it. Marcus Aurelius never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His power didn't come from outer command, but from inner calm amid political chaos. He didn't signal. He didn't tell people who he was. He just lived in a way that made others correct themselves when standing beside him. That is gravity. Not declared, but undeniable. The silent ones make others pause because they embody what the world has lost. Quiet confidence, composed strength, self-assurance that doesn't need performance. And when they leave, no one remembers exactly what they said, but everyone remembers how it felt to be near them. That feeling of slowing down, of being seen, of silently asking oneself, am I broadcasting so many signals because something in me is still hollow? 7. Don't over-explain yourself. The more you need to be understood, the easier you are to control. Not everyone who speaks too much is trying to manipulate. Many talk simply because they can't bear being misunderstood. They explain out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of being disliked, fear that someone might walk out of the room with a distorted version of who they are. And that fear turns them into signal broadcasters, each sentence a plea for acceptance, understanding, or peace in a world where difference is often treated as a threat. But the more you speak just to be understood, the more you reveal that you're still not strong enough to stand still in the face of misinterpretation. Some people enter a conversation with sincere intent, but minutes later, they begin to defend themselves. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean it like that. What I really wanted to say was, they fall into a loop of endless justification, as if any lack of clarity might be used against them. And the truth is, it often is. The more layers of language you build to protect yourself, the more weapons you hand to others if they choose to use them. Someone once told me, I'm not good at communication, so I have to explain everything clearly so people don't misunderstand me. But what he didn't realize was, needing to always over-explain made him appear weightless. Because when you try to make everything crystal clear, you're underestimating the perceptiveness of the person in front of you. And anyone who feels underestimated is unlikely to respect you. Over-explaining doesn't build trust. It raises suspicion. Why is this person trying so hard? In the deepest human interactions, total understanding is rare. But mature people will choose silence over justification, not out of arrogance, but because they understand. If someone already holds a bias, every word you say will be filtered through it. Explanation won't erase misjudgment. It will only exhaust you. And the worst part is, you'll still be misunderstood only now. You're more drained. Stoicism doesn't glorify blind silence, but it respects the limits of speech. Marcus Aurelius once wrote something he never shared publicly. Don't waste your breath on those who've chosen not to understand. It wasn't bitter, it was realistic. He didn't seek consensus, he sought peace. And sometimes, to preserve that peace, all you have to do is stop explaining even when misunderstood. That's not resignation, that's freedom. You don't need to explain everything to everyone. No one truly cares about the whole truth as much as you think. They care only about the part they want to believe. So let them. And you, if grounded enough, will know that truth doesn't need to be drawn into diagrams, dissected line by line, or broken into bullet points. Truth simply needs to be held in your actions, your consistency, and your way of living without asking anyone to verify it for you. Because one day, when you have nothing left to say but remain calm, that will be the moment you stop begging to be understood. And it will also be the moment you begin to understand yourself most clearly. People often say that silence is complicity, avoidance, or the failure to stand up for yourself. But there's a kind of silence that doesn't come from weakness. It comes from strength. Strength powerful enough not to be swayed by others' opinions. Steadiness deep enough not to edit every distorted viewpoint. A freedom that doesn't come from being correctly understood, but from not needing to be in order to live peacefully with oneself. There will be times when people misjudge you. They'll assign motives you don't have, twist the meaning of your actions, place you in a frame you never chose. You'll feel the urge to defend, to write a long post, to stand up and explain everything to the crowd. But if you've done that enough times, you'll realize the more you explain, the deeper the misunderstanding becomes. The more you defend, the more guilty you seem. And eventually, you'll begin to choose silence not from helplessness, but from the realization that in an environment not seeking truth, every word you say is fuel for distortion. Silence is not surrender. Silence is setting a boundary. It's your way of saying, this part I keep for myself, and I owe you no explanation for it. In a world where everyone thinks they're entitled to your clarity, the one who protects their inaccessibility is the one truly in control. They don't let others penetrate their being with a single question. They let deliberate ambiguity protect their core. Once, I witnessed a friend being misunderstood by his own teammates. Rumors spread like fire, and he knew it. He had enough evidence to clear his name, but he simply smiled and said nothing. When I asked why, he replied, "Because I have more important things to do than clean up other people's thoughts." He didn't speak like someone who didn't care. He spoke like someone who understood that truth doesn't need to be believed by everyone to be real. It just needs to be lived correctly by the one who knows it. Stoicism doesn't teach you to stay silent in the face of injustice, but it teaches something deeper. You are not obligated to fix every wrong perception of yourself, because if you spend all your energy sweeping up other people's biases, you'll have no time left to build yourself. Silence, in this case, is a strategy, a fortress, a way of forcing others to come to the truth on their own instead of you having to carry it to them. The one who doesn't need to be understood is the one who has learned how to live inside the uncertainty of society. They don't lose themselves just because someone built a false version of them. They know that value lies not in applause, but in loyalty to one's essence. And if you're quiet enough, consistent enough, unshaken enough by misunderstanding at some point, people will start to ask themselves, what if I was wrong? Not all misunderstandings need to be resolved through words. Some only require that you remain standing like a stone that doesn't move, letting the storm pass and still be you. Not bent, not explained, not steered, just you. And that alone, quiet but commanding, is power. 8. Don't let resentment show when you're rejected. There are moments when a single sentence of rejection is enough to make you feel like your entire sense of worth has just been swept aside. Whether it's a failed interview, an unreciprocated confession, or a slammed door of opportunity, the first emotion is rarely sadness. It's hurt. And if that hurt isn't properly transformed, it turns into something more corrosive: resentment. Resentment is the symptom of a mind that hasn't accepted reality, but also lacks the strength to pivot. It is the most primitive response of the ego when denied what it wants. It is the reflex of someone who hasn't yet trained the ability to redirect emotions with depth. When you harbor resentment, what you're really saying is, I have no plan B. I only know how to react to not getting my way. And that reaction reveals a gap in your inner world, a gap of inflexibility, lack of self-command, and undeveloped internal resilience. Rejection doesn't destroy you, but your response to rejection can make others completely reevaluate who you are. Someone who knows how to fail will quietly withdraw, reflect, and return stronger. But a resentful person retaliates with sarcasm, bitterness, or toxic energy scattered in every direction. And instead of leaving behind an impression of missed potential, they leave the image of someone so fragile that a simple rejection unraveled them. I once saw a young candidate walk out of an interview with visible frustration. When told he didn't get the job, he began criticizing the process. mocking the company, and posted a bitter status online laced with veiled attacks. Industry professionals saw it. Some quietly removed his name from future consideration lists. Not because he lacked talent, but because no one wants to trust someone who loses emotional control after a single rejection. He didn't fail due to ability. He failed because he let his wounded ego speak louder than his reason. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you are angry with someone, imagine that you are about to die. It will change your perspective." A person with broad vision won't let a rejection shake their core. They understand not every door is meant to open for them, not because they're lacking, but because the world operates on principles beyond personal will. And if you're smart enough, you'll walk away without leaving a scratch, not even on the person who rejected you. Resentment shortens your future. It turns a small setback into a long-lasting stain. It robs you of the chance to be remembered as someone mature. And, worst of all, it proves you can't fail silently. And if you can't fail silently, you won't succeed with stability either. The first reaction after rejection is what people remember most. Not how good you were, but what you retained. Not what you lost, but what you revealed. And if what you leave behind is resentment, you've just confirmed you weren't ready for something greater. In a world where everyone is taught to assert themselves, the one who is rejected but remains composed becomes an anomaly. They don't scream for justice. They don't write a public post about how unfair it was. They don't need to prove anything. They simply rise, gather their things, and leave without stamping the floor with anger. And that quiet exit is what people remember most. People aren't judged by how they're welcomed, but by how they leave. When someone walks away from the game without tossing back a single emotional reaction, those who remain are forced to confront their own decision. Not out of guilt, but out of absence. That silence doesn't create a void in sound, it creates a void in thought. And that space sometimes resonates more than any defensive speech ever could. The person who stays calm when rejected understands a simple rule. Trust is never earned through outbursts. Trust is built through silent observation, consistency, and patience. And if you can leave an opportunity with eyes still clear, posture still upright, and hands still civil enough to shake the one who turned you down, you're not a loser. You're simply the one not chosen this time. Because people may reject you, but they can't forget the calm you left behind. And sometimes that calm becomes the reason they reconsider not now, but next time. I once met a man who failed 3 consecutive interviews at the same company. But after each rejection, he still sent a thank you email, remained polite to the interviewers, and maintained his professionalism as if nothing had happened. On the 4th attempt, the HR director personally invited him back. Not because he was better than the others, but because in 4 rounds, he never once showed resentment, disappointment, or emotional instability. And that alone proved, if the company entrusted him with something important, they wouldn't have to worry about fragile emotions ruining what they'd built. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are harmed by something, it is not because of that thing, but because you judged it to be harmful." The person who remains composed when rejected is someone who doesn't view rejection as damage. They see it as a temporary conclusion, and when you no longer treat it as the end, you preserve your dignity for the next chapter. The only thing you need to carry forward is consistency in character, in posture, in silence. Because in the end, the rejected don't leave much noise behind. But those who are rejected and remain calm leave an echo that lingers in others long after they've left. 9. Don't attack someone more powerful than you. There's a truth that many young people refuse to accept. You may be right, But if you voice that truth at the wrong time, in the wrong way, and to the wrong person, you could lose everything. And not because you were wrong, but because you fail to understand that this world does not run on pure justice. It runs on discernment of power, timing, and the consequences of every word you release. If you're still weak and choose to attack someone in power, you're not proving your courage. You're simply signing your own name onto the list of those unfit for the long game. Immature people often confuse integrity with uncontrolled defiance. They believe that if they see something unjust, they must speak now, act now, protest now, because silence means complicity. But what they don't see is this. If you haven't yet built inner strength, if you hold no position, if no one truly listens to you, then your voice, even if correct, is nothing more than a sound easily distorted. And when the truth is distorted, it's no longer truth. It becomes a reason to eliminate you from every future opportunity. I once witnessed a young employee stand up during a meeting with senior leadership and challenge the CEO's decision. What he said was entirely valid. He had identified inefficiencies, misplaced resources, but the way he expressed it with a confrontational tone, accusatory eyes, and sharp-edged words caused the entire room to see only one thing: someone who doesn't know their place. No one responded to his critique. But 3 months later, his contract was not renewed. Not because he was incompetent, but because he voiced a truth too early before he had the depth to understand that some truths only carry weight when placed in the right context. Stoicism does not forbid you from reacting, but it teaches you to react as strategy, not as emotional outburst. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "You don't need to say everything you think, just as you don't need to swing your sword, simply because it's sharp." Wisdom lies in knowing when to wait, to recognize that some counterattacks shouldn't be launched immediately, but stored refined, saved for the moment they can flip the entire board, not merely vent the ego's frustration. Those who attack while still weak don't just remove themselves from the game. They also lose the curiosity of those who might have been future allies. Because no one wants to shake hands with someone they might be attacked by next. And that's what leads to isolation, not due to morality, but due to strategy. The more visibly you crave to criticize, the more you are seen as a threat to the current order. And if you're perceived as dangerous before you hold real power, you will be removed quietly, without noise, without a chance to return. Being right is not always a reason to speak. Truth requires timing, it requires context, and it requires someone who understands that a truth held back, sharpened, and released. When you are strong, no longer sounds like rebellion. It becomes a strike so heavy that the opponent cannot counter, not because you shouted, but because you grew. Silence is not surrender. It is an art. A strategy forged through the understanding that you don't always need to clap back, speak up, or slam the table to prove yourself. In many situations, silence is how you reclaim control when others are trying to steal it with provocation, coercion, or manipulation. And when they don't get the reaction they expect, they lose the only weapon they had left: influence over your mind. There are moments when you are oppressed by someone in power. They say things that are wrong, and you say nothing. They cut you off, and you don't retaliate. They make bad decisions, and you don't openly resist. And many watching will think, this person is weak. But if they think that, they understand nothing about stillness, because the one with true composure doesn't need to win every small battle. They only need to avoid being drawn into fights not worth having. In this world, not everyone falls because they're opposed. Many fall from their own illusion of power, and what they cannot endure is indifference. When you don't attack, don't argue, don't debate, they are left without an opponent. And when there's no one left to crush, they turn inward and collapse into their own internal disorder. Your silence, then, is no longer defense. It becomes a mirror reflecting the emptiness behind their authority. I once watched a superior use power to belittle a subordinate, constantly interrupting in meetings, dismissing input, denying every contribution, but the one being attacked never reacted. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself in front of the group. He simply did his job, maintained his presence, and withdrew from all confrontations. A few months later, that superior was reassigned for creating a toxic environment. No formal complaints were made. No leaked emails surfaced. Only silence, the silence of someone who did not react, but also did not comply. And that silence forced the system to adjust itself. Stoicism calls this awareness before ignorance. You are not enduring, you're choosing not to fuel a system already fractured. Non-reaction doesn't come from fear. It comes from not seeing the need. And once you've passed the threshold of needing to win immediately, you begin to access a greater power, the kind that forces others to reflect because they fail to control you through old power plays. Someone sitting on a throne won't fall because you shout. They're used to noise. But when they meet someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't react, doesn't rage, they begin to question. They question the strength they thought they had. Because no one stays in power for long when others stop playing by their rules. And that's when the balance begins to shift. Quietly, without warning, without announcement. Keeping silent doesn't mean you're blind. It means you see too clearly and choose not to engage. Not because you've lost, but because you're stable enough to know. Some towers fall from flawed design, not from outside attack. And by not kicking, not pushing, not lashing out, you stay clean when everything else crumbles. Part 2. The 6 layers of silent armor, making you dangerous without saying a word. 1. Strategic ambiguity. There are people who walk into a room and instantly reveal what type they are. Cheerful, agreeable, temperamental, talkative, predictable. But then there are others who enter and no one is quite sure what they think, what they feel, or what they intend. And precisely because they can't be read, they can't be dismissed. Ambiguity in a world that runs on labels is a rare form of power. It keeps people cautious. It keeps you from being possessed. And more importantly, it leaves room for you to redefine yourself at any time without being trapped by the image you once constructed. Ambiguity is not deception. It's a strategic choice to preserve the boundaries of your inner life. A wise person doesn't reveal all their thoughts, emotions, plans, or beliefs to public view. Not because they have something to hide, but because they understand. Anything too obvious loses its value. When you allow others to read all your intentions, you're also handing them the ability to manipulate your mind. You can be polite, but not predictable. You can be open, but not easy to grasp. The more easily someone is defined, the more easily they are controlled. The more ambiguous someone is, the fewer openings they offer to be dragged into a game they didn't choose. And in a noisy world where everyone tries to define themselves through stories, statuses, and declarations, the one who can maintain ambiguity is the one who still holds depth. I once met a man in a high-level meeting. For 2 hours, he said nothing. He sat there, listened, showed no emotion, revealed no stance. Whenever someone asked for his opinion, he simply said, "We should look at this from a few more angles." It wasn't avoidance. It was his way of preserving the right to assess, without being cornered into premature conclusions. And when the meeting ended, no one knew which side he was on. But everyone agreed on one thing: if there was someone they needed to win over, it was him. Because no one wants someone ambiguous as an opponent, and someone whose stance, actions, and boundaries are fully revealed ceases to be a threat. Epictetus once warned, if you let others know everything you think, you've handed them the keys to your mind. And in a world where information can be exploited, twisted, sold, and used to control you, maintain the final safeguard by keeping a part of yourself unreadable. Clarity might win you temporary affection, but ambiguity earns lasting respect. A wise woman never lets anyone fully know what she's thinking. Not because she's hiding something, but because she understands that by holding back a part of herself in silence, she grants herself the ability to redefine whenever needed. She's not trapped in an identity someone else attached to her, not locked by the expectations of the crowd, not drawn into unnecessary confrontation. And when the time comes to act, it is that prior ambiguity that makes the action striking and weighty. Ambiguity is not for the weak. The weak will be misunderstood and scramble to clarify. The strong hold on to the right to be misjudged if the cost of clearing things up would be to expose their inner core. Some misunderstandings don't need resolution. Some questions don't need answers. Some remarks don't need correction, because the more you stay silent, the more others have to guess. And when they're guessing, you're the one directing the game. Ambiguity means you don't over-disclose, not to hide, but to choose when to step into the light. It means you don't let others draw conclusions too soon. It means you don't lock yourself into a single identity. Because you know, flexibility is part of power, and power doesn't come from being understood, it comes from being ungraspable. There's a saying, the deepest people are those no one can read. It's true because such people keep others on edge. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're unpredictable, and in every game, the unpredictable is the most intimidating. You don't need to fabricate mystery. Just speak less, explain less, share less. Stop striving so hard to be understood. Because when you stop reacting to clarify everything, you step into a deeper safety, a place where you are no longer a product of someone else's lens. In a world that measures people by surface displays, be the one they can't measure with those tools. When they expect you to be easily manipulated, stay quiet. When they expect you to react, stay still. When they expect you to speak, step back. Not because you're weak, but because each well-timed silence adds another layer of invisible power, not seen, but unmistakably felt. 2. Entering life with a whole self. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like something in you was missing? Not your wallet, not your phone, but yourself. You look around and realize you're adjusting your behavior to fit in. Your voice softens, your body language shifts, your smile becomes artificial. Every gesture seems programmed to make others comfortable, to avoid friction, to blend in. And in that moment, you are no longer whole. Many people step into life not on their own feet, but on the expectations of their parents, the molds of society, the patterns of their friends, or the image they've forced on themselves after years of fear and craving for approval. And they never pause to ask, if I strip all that away, what remains? Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It simply means you're not fragmented from within. Not someone who smiles politely while doubting everything inside. Not someone sharp in public, but self-loathing in the mirror. Not a polished shell that wrestles nightly with emptiness in the chest. Wholeness is when you rise, work, speak, and respond without needing to edit your essence moment by moment to match someone else's script. And here's the irony. Society will praise you for being adaptable. But over time, that very adaptability will erase you. because a person who always fits in no longer belongs anywhere. Every place becomes a stage. Every relationship becomes a performance. And bit by bit, you lose the right to live honestly. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Remind yourself often, what others think does not define who you are. What defines you is how you live in alignment with your reason and dignity." A whole self doesn't come from being liked. It comes from not needing anyone to validate your worth. You don't need consensus to feel right. You don't need praise to feel alive. You only need to know, I am living in truth with myself. That isn't easy. Wholeness means being misunderstood, disliked, isolated, labeled difficult, weird, stubborn, inflexible. But through it all, you remain calm. Not because you're cold, but because you've chosen your own being as compass, not fleeting emotions or the crowd's approval. You don't fight the world. You simply don't let it rewrite your core from the inside out. There's a peace that only comes when you no longer feel the need to explain who you are. Not because everyone understands you, but because you no longer need them to. You live by principles, guard your boundaries, speak when it matters, stay silent when it's right, act without seeking praise, and let your presence speak what words cannot. That's when you stop entering life afraid of being measured. You enter with fullness, not by anyone else's definition, but by the map of your own soul. Wholeness isn't lofty. It's simply the state where you no longer feel the need to retract any part of yourself to keep going. When you love without lowering, work without pretending, stay silent without feeling diminished, withdraw without feeling lesser, sit alone without feeling lonely, stand in a crowd without feeling lost, not because someone sees you, but because you see yourself clearly. Someone once asked, "How do I live honestly in a world that keeps demanding I change?" The answer is, you don't have to fight the world. You just have to stop betraying yourself. When someone asks you to violate your values, say no. When the tide pushes you off course, hold your route. When someone demands an explanation for your difference, let them find the answer by watching you live. You're not the narrator of your life. You're the main character. A person with a whole self doesn't need to perform. They don't need to act wise, wear philosophical robes, or flaunt depth. They're not loud, but not invisible. Not trying to impress, but impossible to forget. Because they're real, and what's real always carries weight. What's not, no matter how eloquently wrapped, is just makeup waiting to melt. Stoicism doesn't teach you to feel nothing. It teaches you to build a self so solid that when emotion arrives, you remain yourself. Not swept away, not controlled, not distorted. When you've built that kind of self, you enter life with no need for weapons, no armor, no role to play, just you, raw, still, deep, and unshakable. And when others look at you, they won't understand how you remain so composed in a chaotic world. They won't know that you're no longer searching for where you belong, because you've carried your whole self with you from the moment you walked out the door. 3. The power of withdrawing at the right time. In a world that glorifies resilience, withdrawal is often seen as defeat. From a young age, we're taught to keep pushing, never give up, fight to the end. But few tell us this. Some battles aren't worth sacrificing your mental clarity. Some places aren't worthy of your presence. And some people, no matter how hard you try, will never be deep enough to meet you. And withdrawal, if done at the right moment, in the right way, becomes a force no one can break. Not everyone who stops is broken. Some stop not because they're weak, but because they're wise enough to see. Moving forward is no longer the intelligent path. A leaking ship might still sail a few more miles, but a captain who releases the wheel at the right moment saves the crew rather than sinking in silent internal collapse. There's a kind of strength that doesn't come from bracing, but from letting go. Letting go not out of helplessness, but from the awareness that your existence shouldn't be confined to a space that's already wrong. Not everything you walk into is meant to be held on to. Sometimes you walk in to learn, to realize, to experience, and then step out. Gently, without attachment, without regret. Because stepping out with clarity is when you preserve your deepest integrity. I once met a woman, intelligent, intuitive, full of potential. She worked at a large, reputable organization with great benefits and a promising career path. But what no one else saw was how that environment was slowly suffocating her identity. Her integrity was called difficult. Her depth was labeled complicated. She strained herself to fit, and the more she forced it, the more she cracked. One morning, she sent a resignation email, no complaints. No blame, no demands, just a clean exit. And from that day, she built another career not loud, but peaceful. Peaceful enough not to perform. Honest enough not to wear armor while doing what she loves. She withdrew to preserve her selfhood, and that was her first real victory. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Know when to leave a place that no longer allows your mind to remain clear." The world gives no medals for knowing when to stop, but those who do often end up with more inner freedom, clarity of direction, and a balanced value system. The one who withdraws is not weak-willed. They simply understand that willpower should only be spent on what's worthy. Withdrawing at the right moment is a skill of the wise. You're not giving up on everything, you're stepping away from a battlefield that no longer serves your growth. You're not fleeing, you're reorienting. You're not avoiding, you're preserving the most essential part of yourself for a more fitting place. Because you know, your true self wasn't made to erode in a misaligned environment, to bend under false pressure, or to exhaust itself chasing something that only leads to regret. There are relationships you thought were sincere, but were only built on how much discomfort you were willing to endure to keep the other person comfortable. There are roles you kept not because they suited you, but because you didn't dare to leave. There are titles that sound impressive, but every time you say them, you feel like an actor. And if you don't dare withdraw from those things, you're silently reshaping yourself into a distorted version every day. A slow, destructive erosion. Withdrawing at the right time is also how you keep your mystery. In a world where everyone is trying to be visible, disappearing at the right moment makes your presence more valuable. The person who walks away from a needless argument forces the other to question their own attitude. The one who leaves a room full of fake brilliance leaves others wondering, what does he know that we don't? Be silent when it's needed. Disappear when it's right. Step out of the cycle while others are still running in it. No one teaches you this. You only learn it through pain, through stumbles, through going too far for something and realizing you paid too high a price. And from that crack, you finally understand. Pushing forward isn't always wise. Sometimes stopping is the only way not to betray yourself again. Stoicism teaches us to control what we can. But here's what many forget. Withdrawing at the right moment is also control of energy, of time, of mind, of dignity. You can't master your life if you don't know when to step back. And no one can trap you in a space where you no longer belong if you have the courage to let go. A warrior doesn't fall because he didn't win. He falls because he didn't know when to leave the battlefield he could no longer win. Humans are the same. You don't lose because you walk away. You lose when you refuse to let go of something that's eating you alive just because you're afraid of what others will think. The world admires the unbreakable. But those truly unbreakable are the ones who know when to step back to preserve what's unbreakable inside, not just the outer armor. 4. The kind of presence that silences a room. There are people who walk into a room without introduction, without words, without flashy clothing or commanding looks. Yet the atmosphere shifts immediately. The conversation slow, loud voices soften, rambling talk halts mid-sentence, not out of fear, not out of authority, but because that presence carries an invisible gravity that pushes all excess to the background. It can't be learned from books. It can't be mimicked with social skills. It's called presence, a type of stillness that forces others to recalibrate. Presence isn't born from boastful confidence, but from a quiet steadiness that doesn't need to be spoken. It doesn't come from what you wear, but from what you no longer need to show. It's not in a proud gaze, but in calm eyes that don't react to the showmanship of others. And because of that, presence can't be copied. It can't be fast-tracked. It can't be constructed with technique. It is forged from years of inner work, from what you've endured, what you've observed, from your needlessness to prove anything until one day it radiates silently from you. I once saw a man enter a major business conference. He wore no suit, had no assistant, said nothing, gave no cues. But within minutes of his arrival, those nearby stepped slightly aside, not to avoid him, but to make space. He didn't seek the center, yet the room slowly pivoted around him. No one was told to, but the small talk vanished. The shallow laughter faded. All that remained was focus, silent glances. A presence like that doesn't need to speak because presence itself is a language. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let your character shine not through words, but through a quiet presence full of reason and dignity." A person with true presence doesn't seek attention. They simply keep their gaze undisturbed by others' glances. They don't try to be loved or understood. They don't compete to stand out because they know what is truly solid doesn't climb to be seen. It stays still, and the world adjusts its height accordingly. Presence is not a serious face. It's not fake aloofness. It is steadiness so steady that you don't feel the need to perform. A person with presence doesn't make small talk to kill silence, doesn't chat just to fill space, doesn't speak just to avoid loneliness. They speak when necessary, stay silent when enough has been said. And for that reason, when they do speak, others stop. Someone once asked me, "How do I gain presence like that?" I replied, "Presence doesn't come from trying to impress, but from no longer needing to. When you stop chasing validation, you begin entering the space of those who never had to fight for a place to stand. When you stop judging others, you no longer react to every glance. When you no longer need to say everything you know, your words begin to carry weight. True presence is forged in the moments no one sees, when you stay silent during a pointless argument, when you choose not to strike back just to protect your calm, when you collapse in silence but don't let life unravel you, when you sit alone, facing yourself without escaping into social media, people, or temporary pleasures. Each time you withhold reaction to preserve inner peace, you add another layer to your presence. No one can teach you how to make a room go silent when you enter, but you can train yourself by going silent with what doesn't matter, withdrawing your energy from toxic people, pulling back your performance when it's unnecessary, and ending the need to prove who you are. A person with presence doesn't raise their voice, but they are never ignored. They don't need to win every conversation, because they know a well-timed silence is the most profound reply. There's a quote I've always remembered. The more grounded a person is, the less they feel the need to speak. Because speech should be used to build, not to win. And the person with presence is the one others listen to, not because they're loud, but because when they speak, we know it's for a reason. When they're silent, we know it's intentional. When they withdraw, we know it's a boundary. And when they're present, we sense there's something deeper than what our eyes and ears can grasp. 5. Train stillness as a weapon. No one is born with the ability to remain calm. True stillness is not innate, it is forged like a blade. Quiet, sharp, sheathed, but ready to cut through chaos when necessary. It is not the passive silence of the weak, but a deliberate choice made over and over until it becomes second nature. And one day, you won't have to strain to remain calm because calmness has become your very presence. Stillness is not a state. It's a skill, and like any skill, it demands training, consistent, serious, disciplined. A person cannot enter the world with inner chaos and expect others to respect their presence. You cannot mask impulsiveness by keeping your mouth shut, nor can you fake composure by lowering your voice. Because true stillness is not external, it resides within, where chaotic thoughts no longer rule. How many times have you said something you shouldn't simply because you couldn't bear 5 seconds of silence? How many times have you reacted too soon because waiting felt unbearable? How many times have you felt compelled to speak not out of necessity, but from fear of being forgotten? Those moments are where the real training happens. Not on a meditation cushion, not in books, not in quiet rooms, but in the very situations that shake you. Stillness begins the moment you choose not to respond to a message right away, even when anger is boiling inside. It starts when you hear someone attack you, and instead of reacting, you ask yourself, what in their words truly touches me, or is it just my ego getting irritated? It continues with a habit of starting your morning not with noise, but 5 minutes of breathing, observing your racing mind, and smiling simply because you're still alive. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be a statue. It teaches you to live amidst life's turbulence without letting the external chaos rupture your internal structure. And that's only possible when you treat stillness as part of your art of living, not a tactic for situational defense. I once met a man who ran a large company with hundreds of employees. During a tense 2-hour meeting, everyone argued, snapped, and pushed back. He said nothing. Just sat there, hands on the table, eyes steady on the speaker, face unmoved. When things finally quieted, he said a single sentence. Is anyone here asking for what they truly need or just reacting emotionally? The room fell silent. No one replied, because everyone realized they had been pulled into the noise. And he, the one who held stillness to the very end, was the one who held true power. Stillness, when trained to a certain level, becomes an invisible weapon. You don't need to raise your voice to make someone stop. You don't need to slam a table to command attention. You simply stay grounded. And when others see that you remain unmoved, they instinctively adjust their tone. Not because you threaten them, but because your calm renders their old tactics useless. Training stillness is like sharpening a sword. You must know when to hone it, when to sheath it, when to draw it, and when to leave it untouched. Not every situation requires its use, but its very existence allows you to walk with certainty. And when others know you possess such a sword, they stop testing your limits. A person who's never sat alone in silence won't stay composed when rejected. One who's never paused before speaking won't stay sharp when provoked. One who's never treated stillness as a weapon won't hold power in a room where everyone is trying to out-talk one another. That's why you train not to meditate for aesthetic's sake, but to live each day as a warrior who refuses to be overtaken by noise. Stillness is not for the indifferent. It's for those whose inner strength runs so deep they don't need to react instantly. Don't need to assert themselves. Don't need to join every battle. And when you gain that serenity, you'll realize the quieter you become, the sharper you get. The more still, the deeper. The less you react, the more others recalibrate themselves around you. You can't stop others from causing chaos, but you can choose not to react like someone chaotic. You can't control the world, but you can master yourself. And the one who controls their reactions is the one who's secretly running the game, even when no one sees it. 6. Loyalty to silence. Silence is often misunderstood. In a world that worships expression, where everyone screams for voice, attention, recognition, the silent are viewed with suspicion. People think you're hiding something, that you're too weak to speak up, that you're avoiding, but no one asks, could silence be a form of presence? A noble refusal not of others, but of a game built on the need to lower yourself. In its purest essence, silence is not lack. It's a deliberate pause. It's knowing that once a word is released, it can lose its value, especially if spoken in the wrong place, to the wrong person, at the wrong time. You may have 100 truths to share, yet still choose to keep them in your chest, not because you are incapable, but because you refuse to lower your truth into ears unworthy of hearing it. Dignity is not in how you react, but in knowing when not to react. There are conversations where your silence unsettles more than any rebuttal could, because with no reaction, they have nothing to push against. With no debate, they have no opening to drag you down, and in the void you leave, they must face the echo of their own noise with no one left to blame, to bait, to battle. Only themselves and the shadow of their meaningless chaos. You don't need to speak every time to prove you understand, nor must you correct every false statement about you to protect what's right. Some truths, the more you explain, the more distorted they become under bias. Some values, the more you defend, the weaker they appear because the listener isn't seeking truth, but cracks to exploit. In such moments, silence becomes the guardian of your truth, keeping it untouched by a fruitless battle. I once witnessed someone being insulted in public. They had every means to fight back. They had all the proof needed to destroy the attacker's claims. But they did nothing, just stood, silent, and walked away. The crowd went quiet. The attacker stood there awkward, angry, isolated because no one wanted to help crush someone who had just shown. Silence, when placed precisely, carries more weight than any sharp retort. They say silence is golden, but not all silence is precious. Only when it comes from inner strength, from confidence that needs no display, from self-respect that doesn't scream to defend, does it hold real worth. A worth that needs no applause, no praise, just protection, like quiet armor forged around a soul that has been tempered. Some fear silence. To them, it signals weakness, loss of control, defeat. But those who have journeyed deep within know silence is when you hold the most. Hold on to yourself before someone steals it with a provocation. When you no longer need to speak, you've outgrown the urge to win with words. You don't need to win anymore. You just need to remain unshaken. Dignity can't be preserved if you let anyone touch it through cheap conversations. If someone can pull you into a shouting match with just a few jabs, you've handed them the reins. But if you hold your silence and walk away, your power remains intact. That is dignity, not easily provoked, not needing to be right, not fearing being misunderstood. In Stoicism, Silence is a manifestation of Logos' supreme reason. Those who follow reason don't waste energy on things that build nothing lasting. They don't react impulsively. They wait. They observe. And when they do speak, it's only what matters. When the issue no longer deserves their presence, they walk away, not because they lost, but because they've grown too much to need to win. Silence is a kind of honor. It doesn't need to be recognized. But if you can keep it in a space where no one else can, you become a living reminder. Not every loud word has meaning, and not every silence is weakness. There is a silence that makes you disappear, but there is another that makes you more present than anyone else. And between the two, only one thing makes the difference: why you are silent. One who stays quiet to avoid will always carry unease, afraid the world will find them lacking. But one who chooses silence to stand within their own depth, they have not withdrawn. They are fully present without needing noise to prove it. We have grown used to speaking as reflex. When challenged, we speak. When misunderstood, we explain. When ignored, we stir waves. Modern life is a stage of overlapping echoes. And in that theater, the silent are often seen as outsiders. But perhaps, only when you step outside the noise can you see yourself clearly. And only when you choose silence not as retreat, but as a commitment to live in alignment with your depth, can you truly begin to engage life not as a drifting leaf, but as a rooted tree. Commitment to inner life is a discipline. It's not isolation or withdrawal. It's the careful regulation of what you put out: your words, reactions, decisions, emotions. You don't let the world pull you out of yourself just to meet demands to show up, speak up, or exist at any cost. Those loyal to silence understand the inner life needs stillness to breathe. And if you don't guard that space, you'll lose yourself living for others. One who has no commitment to their inner world speaks for things they don't yet understand, reacts to emotions they haven't fully grasped, and lives on the edge between approval and abandonment. But one who is loyal to their inner world walks slower, speaks less, responds later, but when they show up, you know they are steady and not easily shaken. I once sat in a meeting. People were fiercely debating a minor issue. Everyone tried to talk over one another, desperate to deliver the final point. One person older sat still, silent for 40 minutes. When fatigue finally silenced the room, he looked up and gently said, "Who here is speaking for a solution, and who is speaking just to be right?" No one answered. No one had anything left to say, because the question needed no answer. It needed silence to echo within. And he, the silent one, had gone deeper than anyone in the room. Silence is a form of understanding. When you no longer feel the urge to insert yourself into every conversation, you begin to hear more, not just what others say, but what you yourself are thinking. And in that space, you begin to form a real connection with your inner life, something lifelong talkers may never touch. People think, to change the world, you must act, speak, fight. True, but only halfway. The other half is this: to change anything, you must begin from something unshaken. And the only thing unshaken is the part within you nurtured only in stillness. No one can see their path if they live inside others' noise, and no one can stay on course if they're always chasing the crowd's cheers or criticism. Silence, when rooted in inner commitment, becomes the foundation for every wise decision. Because in that quiet, you begin to hear what is truly yours and what is just echo of expectations, of bias, of passing emotion. You don't have to quiet the world. You only have to quiet yourself. And to do that, you must choose silence not as withdrawal, but as a noble act to guard your final refuge from the screams of life. Inner commitment is not isolation. It's a way of living with clarity. That presence doesn't have to be loud. Some walk through crowded streets unnoticed, yet leave a mark on life. Some words whispered last a lifetime. Some never stand center stage, yet make the entire room pause. Because the truth is, silence, when weighty enough, surpasses every echo. And that's why the Stoic doesn't teach you to speak beautifully, but to protect what's right. Not every truth must be spoken. Some, the more you speak, the more value they lose. And when you stay silent, not out of fear, but because you refuse to speak what's right in the wrong moment, that is the highest courage. I used to be someone who talked too much. Every time I was misunderstood, I rushed to explain. Every time I was insulted, I had to find a way to strike back. I hated silence, because deep down, I feared that if I didn't say anything, people would think I was weak. But after too many times of speaking without being heard, after debates that drained me but changed nothing, I began to learn how to stop. And I realized, sometimes, silence is the most decisive response. Not out of helplessness, but because I had come to understand that some values don't need to be justified. Some boundaries don't need to be shouted to be known. I don't stay silent to disappear. I stay silent to preserve the one thing that must never be lost, the stillness within a self that has chosen to stand firm without asking anyone's permission. If you've found value in this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. Every time you pause to truly listen, not to me, but to yourself, you take another step on the path of becoming unshakable. Be the one who is silent but never invisible. The one who is still but never ordinary. I'll see you in the next video.